Hello, Alex. Good to see you here.
Hey, Andy. Nice to see you as always.
We're back for another live podcast episode. Good to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here, Andy. Thanks for inviting me along. And I hope you've been enjoying the weather.
My goodness, it's rather hot here in the UK at the moment, isn't it?
It certainly is. Yeah, I've just come upstairs to get a slightly quieter atmosphere, and I've realised it's about 40 degrees in this room. So if I happen to kind of pass out or something partway through, you'll know what's going on.
We hope that won't happen, Alex, but it's good to have you here. You'll be our third guest on the Repod podcast, which is a podcast for the research at the University of Salford. So it's great to have you here. Tell us a bit about your role at the university, your lectureship, your role that you have is quite varied, isn't it?
I'd say it is, Andy. Yeah, so I'm lecturing digital business for Salford Business School, but I'm also head of the disruptive tech cluster at the university as well. So yeah, it's a very, very varied role, Andy. There's I think academic roles generally kind of split between teaching and research and enterprise work, but I think I'd like to think I'm one of the people trying to do all these things. Sometimes kind of in a bit of a jack of all trades style way, but put it this way, there's very few boring days.
Sure are. And of course, digital is such a big focus of work at Salford University. I feel like across all the schools, people are really focused and interested in digital research, aren't they?
They really are. And, I think Salford has always been, the kind of forefront of, practical things and innovations and so forth. Like Salford, started, the Britain's first park, for example. It's we've always had that sort of innovative, practicable thing in our DNA, I think, and the idea of welcoming people from different classes, different genders, different diversities from all over the world. So Salford's obviously a very working class type of place, isn't it? And Karl Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto from the Crescent pub across from the university. So it's got that in its sort of roots and its DNA in the sort of industrial revolution. But now I look from my office window to the industrial revolution, and then just to my left hand side, Media City, the digital revolution. So again, now I feel that Salford's really at the forefront of these things, and we've really established a brilliant reputation, I think, in the UK and beyond around our sort of knowledge around digital innovations and digital marketing and creative technology and media.
For sure. And for each of these episodes, we do like to go back to the roots and understand a bit about the person that leads them to their research program. So tell us a little bit about your journey into research and what led you to Salford and I guess really where you are at the moment in terms of focus.
That's a really good question. So my background, I did a sort of electronic imaging and media communications degree over at Bradford in 1997. So that was just when the internet was starting to become a thing, so when it was started off kind of, making sort of analog TV programs and chopping bits of tapes up. And I think after the first year, the course tutors commissioned a friend of mine to write a paper on what the internet could do for this course. And of course, a year or two later, it was the course, So I sort of fortuitously, as a graduate in 1997, was one of the first kind of web developers, coming out of that. It wasn't a thing when I started the course, but by the end of the course, our final projects were web development and multimedia creation, So that kind of, I went into the course thinking I'm going to come out making TV programs, and I came out making websites. So the great strength of it was, this is a new and emerging market, but the downside was the market wasn't quite ready for web developers. So I went through a ton of applications. I got offered a job down in Oxford doing multimedia. And then I think it was my dad showed me an advert in The Guardian for funded PhD students. So I thought, well, that looks interesting, but I didn't know too much about doing a PhD at the time. So anyway, I got an interview. So I went along and I kind of made this website for, I thought I'll just kind of show them what I can do. And I made a little website based on my sort of PhD proposal, if you will. And there was a guy in the office as well who was from another bit of the organisation, Salford University. It was a funded project called Genesis. But the bit he was from was called the Virtual Chamber, and he was in the interview. And they rang up about a week later and they said, well, the bad news is you didn't get on the PhD program. But what would you say if we offered you a full-time web developer and multimedia developer job for the university? And I said, well, I'll bite your hand off, and the rest is history. So my job was partly trying to get Manchester online, and and also working with some of those PhD students to sort of digitize some of the stuff. So, for example, there was a woman who created a really good kind of offline health course, and my job was to try and digitize it. So that's kind of always been a facet of my career, is trying to look at sort of the digital maturity of things, particularly learning and sort of e-learning. And that's been a something that I've always kind of had, with developing websites, looking at digital marketing, developing PHP systems for, pre-WordPress, content management, and e-learning systems, back-end systems and things like that. So did that for a few years, worked for a spin-out company doing e-learning, creating business simulations for some years. And then I came back to university about 14, 15 years ago on a second stint, ran a commercial unit doing sort of digital development, digital marketing for 10 years. And then I did a master's in creative technology, and that brought me in all kinds of, it was that point really where I really started to think about research, because I had to do a master's dissertation. I was starting to do building systems and then doing some of the underpinning research like surveys and interviews and things like that in order to present at a conference and write a dissertation. And then people started saying, oh, you've built a system here for students to blog and set up profiles. Could you come and do a guest talk to my students? And it was at that point where I had a master's. Then people started asking stuff. And then it was that point my old colleague Alexi Hines said, I've got this CPD course called Search and Social Media Marketing. I can't do it anymore. Do you want to do it? I went, silly me, just went, yeah, of course I can do that. So then I had to get all the books out and start actually figuring out how to do it properly. And that started me off on the journey of teaching, did the PG CAP. And then the rest is history. But it was the Masters in Sports Directorship, I think, and then starting to do some teaching on digital journalism at Media City when it opened, that made me think, actually, research is really cool and interesting, and actually it's not just what you might think, sort of, dealing with quantitative numbers and, doing sort of hard science. There is a social science aspect to it now, which I've done, from A-level to degree in order to get a degree, but I've never ever thought about a career as a researcher, So it was the masters really that set me on that pathway, I think.
So you're really the embodiment of, I guess, Tim Berners-Lee's motif for the internet, which is this is for everyone. And it's been an incredibly enabling technology for you, I think.
It really has. It's strange though, isn't it, that you can go into a university course for over 4 years with a foundation year and kind of come out of the other end with a brand new revolutionary world leading technology, to the point where we haven't even got modules to deal with this anymore. But because we had such a great sort of community of people working with us, staff and students, we were in the lab every day and just sort of self-teaching ourselves. So there was a guy on the course, and he'd nabbed some HTML from somewhere off the internet and built a little website for a friend of his in America. So I went, oh, can I have a look at that? And I went, oh, right, okay, I could do that. And then if another friend said, oh, the university's got can give it its own web space. And I took my old Amiga 500. Do you remember them? I took those and plugged that into the halls of residence. I think Bradford one of the few that had copper connections into the halls of residence. So we were chatting to Americans, and I was, this is crazy, So eventually I put a little homepage up, and I was getting all these Americans writing to me and going, oh, I love your homepage. I'm like, well, how did you even find it? So it's just a weird, we weren't really taught this stuff. We sort of self-taught to an extent, but then used it for our final projects, and so like, right, we're making a CD-ROM, let's also make a website. And people are like, what's a website? So it was like the first year of that cohort that there were ever, website projects delivered on that course, I suppose, because we realized quickly that this was going to be the future,
Yeah, and you've got some great heritage in that background. The Bradford being, of course, the home of what was previously the National Media Museum, now the National Science and Media Museum, a fantastic venue with all sorts of wonderful things in it.
Well, the actually degree was part university, part Bradford College, and part National Media Museum as well. So we were down in the old TVAM studios making TV programs, and in Pitcherville, watching films and writing, critiques of films and talking about how Marxism factored into film development and things like that. So it was a really interesting degree, and it was a BSc as well, which is really weird for me, because I'd done kind of arts-based A-levels. I did like sociology, philosophy of religion, and English lit. So I had to do a foundation year in order to. But when I went for the interview, they said I said to him, like, how much maths and physics in this course? Because honestly, I would struggle with it, you know. And oh no, and it's all sort of applied and all that. So like, I got on the foundation year because obviously I didn't have those, you know, technical science-based A levels. And the first year in the foundation year, it was like every day double maths and physics. Some of it was like post A level. I'm like, oh my goodness, there was a point where I almost quit. But I realized, I know I switched to sociology, but I realized everybody else on the foundation year was on a similar boat. So I got some help from someone in Halls who was doing a maths degree, scraped through the maths, post A level maths, and then lo and behold, it did become much more applied after that. And we were in the TV studios and building the websites and, you know, learning programming languages and all that. So the rest is history. So I'm really glad I didn't quit.
And it really tells a story of how multidisciplinary research often is. I mean, to go from where you started to where you are now, and I guess working within a business school is a very different environment. So tell us a bit about how your research activity interfaces with the sort of business agenda within the school.
That's a really good one. Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're right. You know, to go from arts-based A levels to a BSc to an MA in creative technology and then a PhD in social media marketing within football, it's all there is some kind of thread there, you know, but it's very sort of, it's that the classic thing, isn't it? Theory versus practice, and also kind of, you know, arts versus you know, the sort of business end mixed with a bit of computer science. So the bit of the business school that I'm involved with is around sort of you know, information systems and digital transformation, but of course that crosses over with digital marketing as well. So I've moved around the university. I've had many different roles, from professional services to running commercial units, and, you know, PHP programmer to digital marketer. And then that a commercial unit moved into media, music, performance for a bit, and then arts and media for a bit, and then eventually the business school. And I think mainly it was that connection with the me delivering the search and social media marketing program, and kind of needed to find a fit for that commercial unit and the sort of skills that I had. But it's the guys that we're working with were very much on the sort of digital marketing end and information systems end. So I'm probably out of all my colleagues in the business school, I'm perhaps the most kind of creative media-y type of person. Although we do have people like that. I think there's a real kind of Venn diagram of, you know, the sort of team I work in, maybe more than any other, the ones that really could cut across, you know, arts and media and creative technology and computer science, if that makes sense, you know. So we don't really teach the programming languages anymore, but we do have digital business students and digital entrepreneurship students, and of course there's an overlap there with you know, arts and media and computing as well.
For sure. And certainly, you know, we have fantastic program in data science. There are so many connections, especially when you're dealing with subject matter like social media, which is, of course, you know, what area of society isn't social media present in today?
Well, absolutely.
One.
I've always been fascinated with these online communities. You know, before, you know, pre-social media, I set up a PHP forum for all my friends, you know, and that became like the thing, you know, like now everybody's on Facebook, everyone's on my forum, you know. So I've always been fascinated with the way, you know, from day one that you could, you know, set up chat rooms. Like we were using things like Internet Relay Chat in 1995, you know, and I was like, that's incredible, you know. So it's, as it's kind of grown and evolved, I've just become fascinated in it. And I think through the Masters in Creative Technology, I did some, you know, research around social media, and it sort of took off from there. And so the search and social media marketing module led me a bit more down the digital marketing route, and hence my PhD was very much like a crossover between sort of creative media, social media marketing, information systems, you know, as a bit of a hybrid, I think. So, but yeah, I mean, like you said, this stuff's evolved massively, and I'm a, you know, much more of a qualitative type of researcher, as you know, Andy. So I like kind of talking to people about these things and asking how and why this works, and understand the sort of complexity of human meaning, you know. So that led me towards the you know, ethnographical ways of doing things, you know. So at the beginning of my PhD, you know, you was right, what am I going to do for a topic? And I wrote a proposal around sort of business simulations, because I thought it was like a hot topic at the time. And then this partnership started with the university and Salford Football Club in the class of '92, working with the Centre for Sports Business. And I was sort of sat on 2 out of 3 of our centres at the time, the Centre for Digital Business and the Centre for Sport Business. I'm like, well, what a great opportunity this is, you know. So people were saying, oh, choose something you're interested in, or choose something, you can make money out of, or choose something you want to be known for. So I've always had an interest in sport, and I've always had an interest in social media and online communities. So it was a bit of a no-brainer in the end. I just scrapped the proposal and wrote a new one, and the rest is history.
Yeah, for sure. And it feels like sports often a place where you see, I mean, it's so wedded to international media technology industries. And so it's a place where you see a lot of innovation, a lot of firsts being tried out at major sporting events. And so I guess since you sort of raised it, what are the sorts of, qualitative researcher predominantly, and very interested in the sort of lived reality of these social networks. What are the sorts of questions that you're asking in your work?
So I'm tending with qualitative research, I'm tending to ask how and why type questions. But my PhD was a kind of a multi-method or blended method around. It was netnography, so it had to contain participant observation or online participant observation, or what we're calling now immersion these days in netnography, but also combined with interviews and another technique called social network analysis, which is kind of about using big data to map out networks. And with social network analysis and the tools, we use tools like Node Excel. You can answer questions like, who are the influencers? Who are the influential people within these networks? What are the network shapes? Who's talking to who? What is the flow of information? And just sort of like from a qualitative, it's quite known as a quantitative method, but I looked at the visualizations and the visualizations of tens of thousands of tweets or hundreds of thousands, and said, what is going on in this network? Who are the key players here? And then I'd approach them and say, could I, first of all, I'd look at, what are they tweeting about? And then if it looked like something significant or useful to my research question, I'd go back and interview them. So it's a real blend, and each method's got its own kind of strengths about the questions that it asks. But certainly it was the how and why, how does that work? Why are you following Salford FC? Or how do you go about practicing your fandom online, through social media? And what does that mean? And it was fascinating just interviewing fans from around the world. You find them kind of on following Salford FC on Twitter and look at him and think, why is this guy here following Salford FC? He's from Bangalore or something, So you reach out to him and go, listen, I really like what you said here about Salford. Why are you doing that? And they're like, because I love Manchester United. I love the class of '92. I love Paul Scholes. I love his goals, and they're like third generation, fourth generation Manchester United fans, and they're following Salford in a sort of light touch way through, because of that connection, because of the social capital, which obviously is a prominent part of my research, as well as a sort of theory contribution as well.
So it sounds like, I mean, they're fascinating questions because they tell us about society. They really explain what is it people care about, what they value. And I suppose in some sense, they also tell us what people do in terms of consumption as well, because of course, a lot of these big brands, big companies are essentially trying to bring also value into the organization in order to make money out of it. So does that element of understanding the sort of consumer culture around sport interface with what you're doing in terms of social media?
It really does, and I think you've very articulately put that. I think there's, we're always looking, I think, for, with research and particularly PhD research, perhaps looking at practical and theory implications, of the study. So the practical ones, obviously, in a business school, business research are quite often, how can we make more money out of this ultimately, or how can we, raise brand awareness, or how can we? So there are implications in a lot of my research for social media marketing managers, for example, about how these networks work and what makes them tick and how the algorithms work and things. So I'd like, to be able to think that out of my PhD and other research that there are, the abstract we could send to the, a social media marketing manager and say, listen, we found out something useful here that you might not have found by studying fans and working with fans. I'm working with experts as well, because quite often, people in practice don't have time to go away and go and interview 10 people in depth, so we kind of do it for them. So there's the practical implication, but clearly, a PhD and for a lot of the good quality journals, we also need to try and make a theory contribution as well, which is something that's much harder for practitioners to get their head around, so we try and, bridge that gap and try and make the theory useful as well, to a certain extent. But yeah, it's a fine balance sometimes, getting that practical and theoretical contribution as well.
And I wonder, since you've sort of mentioned the background to Salford, Marx and Engels, and also mentioned your leadership in the Disruptive Technologies Research Cluster, which I
Yeah,
know is open to anyone across the university to join. And I
yeah.
wonder how you see those things as fitting together, both the kind of proliferation and often monopolization of information through social media in juxtaposition with the disruptive technologies. I mean, how do you sort of square that circle in your work?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And I think first of all, it's the cluster it's open to people beyond the university. In fact, you don't even need to be
Mm.
an academic. You know, we've got some fantastic academics from Durham and Manchester and Stirling and other places. You know, and it's so it's a very sort of open place. And at times the fortnightly meetings we've got, we end up with 25 people in there, and like what we've got people here from professional services and universities all over the place. You know, so it's very sort of open place for people to kind of come in and discuss disruptive technologies. From the focus really is around you know, the P's, you know, presence, pounds and publications, you know, which is the sort of primary sort of outputs of the way we're judged as a university and as academics. So it might be slightly lost on practitioners to an extent, but having said that, I think we have invited practitioners along, and they've well, they have stuck around for the duration, some of them anyway. But so it's that balance. So each week we try and, you know, have a bit of an agenda about what are we going to talk about this week. Are we going to talk about writing a paper or going for a funding bid? Or but the great value, I think, is the interesting people that come along, the member update when they say, what have you been up to? Because it's rare that we run around like ships in the night quite often, and don't even know what our colleagues are up to. You know, we haven't got a CRM system, and even if we did, we probably wouldn't understand anyway what people are doing. You know, so it's just that kind of minute or two each where people say, this is what I'm doing right now, that helps us join the dots up, you know, in a sort of a qualitative type of way.
And yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's a big part of why also we sort of launched the podcast, to get people a bit more aware of each other and what they're working on. And really, it's really fantastic to hear your background and all the things that led you to working on the research you're doing now, because it also explains a little bit the recently launched Us Sorted application, which I know comes out of the Fanfit app that you've worked on. So you have these sort of values of practice built into your research. Tell us a little bit about the Us Sorted application and its background and how that fits into your research.
Yes, that's well reminded, Andy. So the Fanfit project kind of started about 5 years ago, and the university's great in the fact that every year there's some type of competitive fund for research, generally powered by the Higher Education Innovation Fund. So put into that fund a few times successfully for the idea about creating. The original idea came from working with Salford FC and thinking about how sports clubs could create a kind of official smartphone app, which sometimes is kind of beyond the reach time wise and finance wise for sports clubs, you know, particularly the, you know, ones outside the Premier League. So there was a practical problem there to be solved around sort of bridging that gap in terms of digital transformation, but equally kind of societal problems around like you know, heart disease and diabetes. It's a massive problem, you know, particularly in the Northwest and in Scotland, where we've been working as well. The rates of you know, premature death through heart disease is huge, and a lot of it is not completely, but a lot of it can be attributed or circumvented a little bit through becoming more active. So what we call kind of sedentary lifestyle. So there's a lot of sports fans really passionate about the sports clubs, but not maintaining you know, any kind of basic level of fitness. And actually, in a lot of people's minds, they're aware that they need to do more, but the motivation sometimes, you know, for a research shows that people don't quite know how to get going with it, and they don't quite have the motivation or the tools or the competition and so forth. So the Fanfit project was really about trying to bridge that gap. And a few years ago, we worked with students and various other people. We produced an Android version of a Fanfit app called Red Devils Fanfits for Salford Red Devils, the rugby league club, who are fantastic club who we've worked with for a number of years and partnered with. Absolutely great, kind of, you know, working on and open to kind of different new things and interesting things. So we pushed this Android app out, and it basically tracked walking and running automatically through a you know, basic Android or iPhone device. So we knew that, you know, 98% of fans had one of these devices. As much smaller percentage had wristbands, but we're trying to almost like get into those groups of kind of hard to reach fans who wouldn't necessarily own a Fitbit, you know. So when we did some research, we realized there was a lot of people out there that perhaps just needed a bit of a nudge. So that it acted like the official club app. It pulled in, all the stuff you'd expect from a club app, like the, news, fixtures, social media updates, all that sort of stuff. So it did all that, but with the addition of these kind of fitness leagues, walking, running, etc., private leagues, and sort of tracking steps and incentivizing it. So we ran that, and we ran a few competitions, and by sheer fortune, the couple of guys that won the season tickets and the shirts were exactly the type of people that we're trying to reach in the first place. So really good from a research and impact perspective, doing that sort of stuff. So on the back of that, we saw a grant with Nesta and the Scottish Government around, called the Healthy Lives Data Fund, and we're like, we could do that. So we filled the application form in. I've got to say, it was the night before it closed because I only just spotted it then, and we put in working with major Scottish football club, because we had an idea we wanted to work with, but we hadn't actually got official sign off for it. So anyway, a couple of weeks later, to our surprise, he said, "Oh, you're invited up to Edinburgh. You've been shortlisted from 120 applications. You're down to the last 14." So all right, okay, we'll get the train up to Edinburgh, and we did that, and it all went well. And they wrote back to us and they said, "Listen, we're going to give you the grant funding. Can you just tell us who that major Scottish football club is?" So then we were like, right, okay, on the phone, jump on the train up to Scotland a few times, and then we managed to work with the Rangers Charity Foundation with Rangers Football Club, which is a huge brand, and a really exciting project for us. So we again we souped that up and did a lot of focus groups and netnography again, and surveys to understand what fans wanted out of this and what the motivations were and so forth. And we found a lot out, but in terms of what fans wanted out of it, they were quite happy with the functionality. It was mainly they wanted a chat function behind the private leagues, because they didn't want to drop out to WhatsApp to have that sort of interaction, when they're having a banter and winding people up for not doing enough steps or whatever, or trying to give a bit of encouragement, and a bit more interaction with the players. So when we launched the app, we got 2 famous Rangers players to come along and hold a big picture of the app, and then 8,000 fans downloaded it overnight. So it shows the kind of power of social media influence and so forth, which is another interesting part of my research.
Definitely. So it sounds like this sort of getting some feedback here. It sounds like it's getting some. Oh, can you hear me okay, Alex?
Yeah, fine. Yeah,
I've got some feedback on my end. It's servicing people's passion for tracking their data, but putting it into a community place where they can be connected. Because I think that some of these apps, they feel quite anonymous, and you can often feel quite isolated, really. Even if you're connected to lots of people, you may not feel that you're actually part of a community. And that sounds like it's servicing that desire to be part of something. That's
absolutely it, Andy. And say, mention my PhD. I read a lot around social capital. So there's a lot of social capital tied up in brands, and particularly sports brands. There's a strong bond between fans. So it's just sort of utilizing that social capital that exists within those communities. And then, as you say, Andy, kind of localizing it, because the minute you put the club badge on it and the club news and the start to produce content from people that and players that or influence that then suddenly it becomes much more motivating than, as you say, Andy, like a more faceless just downloading a random. So like if you're just gonna, right, what do? I buy a Fitbit. You do that, and then you're in a league of one on your own, and then eventually you just stick it in a drawer and forget about it. Whereas it's the people that keep kind of drawing you back to these things. You're working with immediate colleagues, you're working with fans. So there was a real connection with the Rangers stuff around an existing physical activity program called Football Fans in Training, which has been hugely successful at getting hard to reach groups in training with the club. But after 12 weeks, sometimes you kind of lose touch with each other, or the motivation starts to wane a little bit. So we're talking to them at the minute and saying we could keep that conversation going, and we can keep that motivation going, and just create a little bit more of a competition around it. But what we found is that people are motivated in really different ways. Some people are super motivated to be the top of the monthly league every month and be the best at everything. Some people just want to come the top of their own little private league with people that they could conceivably catch up with. And some people aren't motivated by that whatsoever, or prizes or whatever. They're just like their own personal target. So if they can do 7,000 steps a day, then they're more than happy, and they don't care, what other people are doing around them. But yet still that interaction with people is important to them. And we started to incentivize as well now through the apps. So if you maintain 7,000 steps a day, you get into a prize draw, for example. So it's just that sort of moving away from right, can you do 1,000,000 steps, to can you just sort of maintain a reasonable level of steps? And that kind of led us on to the, the latest iteration, as you say, is Us Sorted, which is the first version we produced outside of sports. So it is for, university staff and possibly students as well, and a bit more angled around the well-being side. So rather than just simply, right, we're trying to get fitter and be more active, but thinking a bit more holistically about, mental and physical well-being, if that makes sense. And that we do that sort of, it's a bit harder, obviously, kind of, step tracking is one thing, but we're working with, the sports centre, our sports centre, for example, producing content. So it's familiar to people, it's in the regional dialect, people know people from the videos. We partner with Mind in Salford that people know and are passionate about local charities and mental health, so that every 1,000 steps staff do, we donate to Mind, for example. So people can, okay, all right, okay, so I'm not going to do 1,000,000 steps, but actually I could do something good for a local charity rather than just, donating a tenner or something, So, and again, working with yourself, Andy, it's been great, producing content that means something. It's from people that we know, and it's got resonance and places that we know, and people are much more motivated by that, as you say, than somebody else that they don't know. I mean, even people like Joe Wicks, I suppose, he builds up a connection with his audience, doesn't he? But ultimately, a familiarity and a social capital and a following, I suppose.
Very much so. And it is really challenging within a big institution to get that sense of community when everyone's very busy. And I think this app, which I know is available on Android and Apple, so people can download it now, they can install it, they can watch some of the videos that have been shared by some various people, but also they can access latest university news. And it's great to see how many people are using it already. It's really nice to see and get a sense of, I guess, partly what people do as well and how active they can be. But it's a great way to bring people together, and hopefully we'll see it as a really positive part of our community as well.
I hope so, Andy. I think you said earlier as well, there's never been a better time for, because we're all kind of isolated and everyone's been through a tough time of it, and some more than others. That sense of community and rebuilding, I think, is critical, isn't it? And if we can use these tools in a positive way to, to motivate people or to make them feel a little bit better about themselves, then all good, But I think that probably we had a really interesting discussion in the cluster this week about motivations of people downloading and using it, or whether there be some things that might put people off as well. So we tried to sort of frame it that this isn't an app for fitness fanatics, really. It's about us and our community, and this really, most people should be able to get something out of it. And of course, you're going to get resistance to people that really hate the idea about tracking steps, for example, or don't really buy into the whole idea, and that's going to happen. But ultimately, but the vibe behind it really is about community and our people, and trying to do some good for local charities and just make people feel a little better, because it's been a tough old time, hasn't it?
It sure has. And it's been a wonderful time here with you, Alex, to learn certainly about your origins and just how interesting a journey you've had to both Salford and the research that you're doing. And it's clear that those values that underpinned your foundation still are very much present in everything that you do. So thanks so much for joining us today. And yeah, we look forward to seeing how Us Sorted develops over the next year.
Thanks very much, Andy. And to say, people are free to download it, but we're also looking for, we think that the app could potentially be rebranded into any organization that's got a, duty of care to its staff, customers, stakeholders, whatever that is. I think it's just about building a community around physical and mental well-being, isn't it, ultimately, which is critical for any organization, I would say.
Definitely, for sure. Brilliant. Well, thanks so much again, Alex, and good to see you here.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andy.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.